Context is everything. One of the things that oftentimes becomes problematic, particularly when we start talking about cultural competence, when we talk about human theories, that too often we don't take into account the context by which people are operating. And so by doing that, we typically miss the majority or the central themes that their behavior offers us as clues about how to effectively work and operate with them, in conjunction with them, and helping them to ultimately get what it is that they're seeking or that they desire. And so context becomes the thing that we have to take into account if we want to be effective in working with people. So when I say context, what am I talking about? Context consists of three things. One, there is the corporeal or the temporal context, so the time frame in which people operate in. There is also the space that they operate in. So how do they operate within the third piece of that, which is the environment? So what is the physical environment like? How do people operate in that space, in that physical environment? And ultimately, what is the time frame associated with those other two concepts? And so what becomes important for us to realize is that if we understand this concept of context, then our ability to have cultural competence is greatly increased. And that also helps us to understand cultural continuity, the importance of why people do what they do in order to continue the successes that their people group has deemed necessary given the context that they operate in. And so everyone operates in a context. And so if we've been brought up, born, raised in a racist context, we then are responding to that context. If we've been brought up in a context where poverty is the defining factor of who we are, then we end up with a poverty mindset. If abundance, if cooperation is the context that we operate in, then we also have those behaviors. And so context becomes extremely important. Here's another way to think about context. So I have a farmer in a rural part of the state, and I would submit to you that farmer has a certain level of intelligence, that they have to know about machinery, they have to know about animal husbandry, they have to know about chemistry in terms of how that relates to the soil. If they're going to be an organic farmer versus a industrial kind of traditional farmer, they have to understand all the dynamics that go along with that. Marketing, how to price and sell their items, the networking needed to do that. And so all of those things become extremely important given their particular context. But if we take that farmer out of his context, and let's say he goes to New York City, and we drop him in downtown Manhattan, what will the people in Manhattan say about this farmer? They may say that he's backwards, they may say that he is not socially competent in all the ways that New Yorkers should and would be. At the same time, if we took a New Yorker out of their particular context and dropped them on this farmer's plot of land, the farmer might say the same thing about those folks from New York, that they don't have cultural competence, that they are not proficient given the same atmosphere that the farmer has grown up in. And so when we start talking about this idea of cultural competence, we have to take into account the cultures that people are coming from. And can a person from New York adapt to the farm life? Certainly. Can the person from a farm adapt to city life? Certainly. The gap between them operating from their previous culture to this new culture, the thing the barrier that separates them being effective in this new culture is time. And so all too often, particularly when we talk about immigrants, when we talk about refugees, when we talk about people who have not been a part or given access to the greater part of our society, what they're consistently missing is the opportunity, the time that it takes to catch up with folks who have been born and raised in that particular cultural context. And so when I think about, black people or black history, when I think about Native Americans, when I think about Asian Americans, when I think about kind of everyday working class white people, some of the things that come up for me is that all too often the educational processes that they've been operating in, some of the cultural norms and the general cultural context has not provided them the opportunity to be or to have the same experience that other people have had. And so therefore, this cultural competence becomes really important. So slaves were granted, quote unquote, their freedom in 1863. The Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964, which is 101 years where black people, particularly in the South, but the majority of black people did not have equal rights to education, to access to goods, jobs, services, and money, to land ownership, to federal loans. All of these kinds of things were things that were barriers to African Americans kind of reaching their pinnacle of their humanity as well as their ability to participate in society. And so when I think about Native Americans, the historical trauma, the things that have happened in the past, and the things that are consistently happening today, really set a context that oftentimes is so difficult for Native Americans to overcome that they self-medicate. Some folks are sick, so they start self-medicating. And with the despair being so great, given the context, all too often suicide and drug and alcohol abuse become the only ways that that many Native Americans have figured out how to navigate or deal with the system. However, there is a growing population of Native Americans who are stepping up and taking charge of their own lives, their own destiny, and creating a new context for themselves and for their brothers and sisters. And the other thing that I'd like to point out in terms of context is that, not all white people are created equal. You can listen to white people themselves. White people who don't measure up to the level of sophistication that most white people think they should have, they call rednecks. They call them white trash. And so when we talk about, this general context, it becomes very difficult for us to move forward if we don't take those things into account. And so as a result of this context that has told white people that if you work hard enough, if you do all the right things, you can get ahead, what flies in the face of that is the reality that if your family has not had access to many of these kind of higher order or higher ideals, particularly when it comes to college and universities, that it's oftentimes more difficult for you as a white person to kind of scratch or claw your way to some top, whatever that top looks like or whatever that is. And so when we talk about this cultural competence, we have to talk about those things as well.